The master cast must be trimmed at an angle of 75 to 85 degrees. The underside of the cast must be flat and indexed. Make 2 conical sprues with the utility wax rope 18 millimeters in diameter. Seal the sprues to the waxed up slightly lingual of the maxillary tuberosities or in the lingual pouches of the mandibular arch. Using the backplate, set the angle of the sprues flush to the model base by pressing the backplate firmly to the posterior of the master cast and adapt sprues to the surface of the backplate. The working height of the model and putty matrix should not exceed 40 millimeters. Block out any significant undercuts in the master cast with wax prior to adapting the silicone putty. Cover the entire wax up along with the buccal and anterior land areas of the model with silicone putty. However, allow both sprues and the posterior land area of the model to remain uncovered. Place retention dimples along the perimeter of the putty before allowing it to set. On a smooth, flat working surface, seal the master cast with utility wax along the buccal and anterior edge of the base, leaving the posterior of the cast free of wax. Coat all exposed stone surfaces of the model with a thin layer of petroleum jelly or stone separator. The JIG flask is designed with 2 chamber sizes. With the cast sealed to the working surface, center the JIG flask around the case with its backplate flush to the sprues using the chamber slot best suited for the size of the cast. Place 2 bent pieces of wire into the retention slots on each side at the bottom of the flask chamber. Hold wire sufficiently in place with utility wax. Seat flask chamber by pressing firmly to work surface. Allow wire retention to pivot freely and not interfere with placement. It is critical to provide adequate clearance for reline jig posts to seat in upper reline jig. Failure to properly seat upper half of reline jig will result in its dislodging from the investment chamber. Mix dental stone to a pourable consistency and spray silicone surface with debubblizer. Slowly pour stone into flask chamber, being careful not to dislodge cast or flask from working surface. Be sure to fill entire chamber with stone, avoiding any trapped air. Use index fingers in post holes of upper half of reline jig to guide onto top of flask. Once centered, secure upper half of reline jig to flask and backplate with dental stone. Once the stone sets, remove backplate and any loose stone around sprue wax. Coat the bottom of the chamber investment with petroleum jelly or separator, avoiding contact with the master cast. Mix mounting plaster in place on both bottom of master cast and bottom half of reline jig. Assemble the jig flask and upper reline jig to bottom half of reline jig and secure assembly by tightening reline jig post nuts. Remove any mounting stone from anterior flask and jig area for inverting during processing. Place entire assembly in boiling water and submerge for 8 minutes. Wearing boil-out gloves, remove from water, loosen and remove support nuts, and gently separate master cast on lower reline jig table from the flask and upper reline jig table. Rinse both halves with clean hot water and remove all wax residue. If master cast becomes dislodged from lower reline jig table, gently pry cast from investment and clean separately. Remove stone particles from borders and sprue access holes. Apply model separator to internal stone areas of flask and the master cast. Allow flask and cast to cool and prepare denture teeth in usual manner. Return prepared teeth to cooled flask. Carve vent in maxillary cast with lab knife or tool along mid-palatal suture line from post dam to back of cast. Insert posts into post holes and gently insert cast assembly back into flask chamber. Visually inspect rear of cast for proper seating. If seating issues occur, clean or remove any obstruction and reassemble. Attach jig post nuts and tighten. Roll utility wax into 25mm diameter circles. Heat sprue area and seal wax around sprue access holes. Stack wax circles to increase reservoir size. Invert flask and pour acrylic into chamber through sprue access holes. Tilt flask occasionally while pouring to help release trapped air. Fill to top of reservoirs and place inverted into pressure pot. Do not submerge flask and allow water to mix with acrylic. Once acrylic has set, remove flask and divest carefully with hammer and chisel.